Yo, what's good guys? Today, I'll be showing you a step-by-step guide on how to put together a sweet 1080p gaming PC. So if you're brand new to DIY PC building, you've come to the right place. So in this video, I'll discuss the parts list very briefly, and I'll show you the step-by-step process so you can follow along at home. First, we'll go over the part selection on every component that we picked for our gaming PC, followed by the step-by-step guide of how to actually install it inside the PC. But before we get into it, a few disclaimers. Number one, this is a used parts build for educational purposes. I don't 100% recommend building a brand new gaming PC right now because of how crazy GPU prices are. Number two, like I said, this is a 1080p low to medium detail gaming PC, so it's a perfect entry-level build for games like Dota 2, Valorant, League of Legends, Overwatch, Apex Legends, and so many more. And the third thing to note, this is an AMD system, but the principles that you learn from building this PC will be applicable to Intel builds as well. So first off, let's talk about the case. This is the Corsair Carbide Spec 06 that comes in white. It's an ATX mid-tower case, and I like it because it's got that tempered glass. It's very popular for people who want to showcase their components, especially with the RGB. Now, I like it a lot in terms of, the color. Kind of reminds me of a refrigerator, but that's not really that important. It's got a lot of modern features. Has dust filter on the top that's magnetic. Like I said, tempered glass. It has a nice power supply basement, so you don't see the rat's nest of cables at the bottom, and just so it looks cleaner overall. It supports ATX, micro ATX, and ITX motherboards, but for today's build, we're going with ATX. It has, I'll just show you real quickly. I'll show you the I/O in the front of the case. So power button, two USB ports over here, mic and headphone jack, and a reset button. And a quick look at the back of the case. So support for exhaust fan. This is where your I/O shield goes. Space for the graphics card and all your other PCIe expansion slots. And down here is where you would screw in your power supply. All right, and then for our CPU, we're going with a Ryzen 5 2600. It is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU from AMD. I think it has a base clock of 3.4 gigahertz and a max turbo of 3.9 gigahertz. This will be plenty for our system if you want to do a lot of multitasking, gaming and streaming at the same time. This is still a pretty good chip. Granted, this came out something like 3-4 years ago, but for our purposes, to show you how to build a PC, this will be fine. Now, this comes with its own stock cooler in the box. It's the Wraith Stealth cooler, but since I have access to this Wraith Prism cooler, this usually comes with the Ryzen 7 3700X. We're going to be using this. It's nice, pretty basic cooler. It's not going to be as nice as the coolers you'd get from a third-party aftermarket solution, but for our purposes, it'll be more than adequate. And for our motherboard option, we're going with the platform called AM4. So we have here a Gigabyte Aorus B450 Elite motherboard. So it's an ATX form factor. That's why it is the pretty big one. This should support all the components that we're going to be using today. So the CPU goes in the middle in the socket there. Here's a shot of the I/O in the back. So this is where you plug all your USBs, other peripherals that you might need. This top slot here is for our M.2 SSD. So we're gonna removing this heatsink and plugging it into there. Our graphics card will sit here, and then there's all these other different sockets where you plug in the fans, the USB 3 cable, cables that come from your power supply, what have you. So think of this as like a hub where all the different components connect to. So yeah, that's the motherboard. For storage, we're going with this kit of Crucial P2 M.2 NVMe SSD. So yeah, storage has gone a long way in technology. So this, what is practically a stick of gum sized thing, is our 1 terabyte. So they make this in 500 gigabytes, also 256 gigabytes, but games are getting pretty big nowadays. As far as I know, Call of Duty Warzone is around 200 gigs or 150 gigs, something like that these days. I'm not sure, but you'll want enough storage so that you can put your OS and other things as well. But since this is PC building, you can always just add more storage in the future. And these two little guys are our RAM sticks. We have a 16 gigabyte kit, so that's 2 by 8 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance RGB. I believe this is the non-pro version. This is rated for 3200 megahertz. Ryzen, as we all know, is very fond of fast memory. So we're gonna be overclocking this in the BIOS to 3200 megahertz so that we can enjoy those blazing fast speeds. The good thing about having a system with more than 2 RAM slots is that upgrading the RAM in the future is as easy as buying 2 more sticks, hopefully of the same make and the same speeds and timings, popping them in the 2 other slots. So we're going to be rocking 16 gigabytes for now, but if we decided to go 32 in the future, it's going to be very easy. And to power our build, I have here a Corsair CX650M. This is a semi-modular power supply, meaning some of the cables will come pre-connected to the power supply, but for all the others that we think we might need, we can just attach those cables as needed. So 650 watts, I think, is above and beyond what this system needs, but in case we want to upgrade in the future, we'll have enough juice for whatever future graphics card we might put in there. Now this is 100% optional. I believe the Corsair Spec 06 case comes with maybe 1 or 2 120 millimeter fans, and on top of that, they're very basic DC fans. So I went ahead and got these nifty little RGB fans from Arctic. I believe they're the Arctic Bionics P120 ARGB and the P12 PWM ARGB. So these are going to be really nice to look at in the case. They're going to be a lot quieter than the default fans. So, I mean, again, this is totally optional, but if you're building a custom PC, wouldn't you want it to look nice? Over here, we've got a card that I can actually recommend to you if you want like a stopgap solution for the time being. So what we have here is an AMD Radeon RX 470 4 gigabyte version. This is specifically the one made by Sapphire. So funny story about this card. In 2019, I went a little crazy when it comes to building PCs. So I built my first DIY PC in 2019 in the same case that we're going to be building in today, the Spec 06. But I went crazy and built 4 or 5 other PCs. One of the PCs that I wanted to build, because I just didn't want to build another gaming PC to replace my current one, was I wanted to make Hackintosh, and I wanted to try it out. So I went ahead and got a secondhand RX 470 from a seller. I think I got this on Facebook. And at the time, the price was decent. Like, I think I remember paying maybe 6,000 pesos for this. These days, an RX 470 or its overclocked older brother, the RX 570, you can get one on Facebook for secondhand around closer to 10,000 pesos, which kind of sucks. But if you want a decent card that's going to play, eSports titles, Dota 2, Overwatch, Apex Legends, Valorant, this is perfectly suitable for that. Rather than spend 25,000 pesos to buy a 1660 Super, I'm not going to spend that much for that card because that card is supposed to cost half. So consider secondhand GPUs from several generations ago, guys. This is still pretty competent, even in today's landscape. So yeah, it's a pretty nice card. Not all cards are going to have a back plate like this. Usually you're going to see the SMDs mounted on the back of the PCB, but This is nice, it has a backplate. In terms of connectivity, we have 2 HDMI and 2 DisplayPort and 1 DVI. So if you wanted to run multiple displays on this, you could, but not really. I mean, for 1080p, you're not really the kind of person who's going to spend on a second monitor unless you really want to and you're a streamer, but you could. But yeah, that's the RX 474GB. Okay, so first order of business as we build this PC, take your motherboard out of its box, and a good place to put it in the meantime is on top of your motherboard box, since it's not gonna have any static or anything like that. We're gonna be building outside of the case first, because the moment we screw down the motherboard into the case, it's gonna be a bit harder reaching in when it's such a tightly cramped space. So that's why we're doing this now. So installing the CPU has a certain orientation to it on the motherboard. So you'll notice the CPU has a golden triangle on the lower left corner. We're gonna match that with the marker. There's also a triangle on the bottom of the CPU socket. So we're gonna make sure those two are aligned when we drop our CPU in. So the golden triangle is here. We're matching it with the triangle that's on the socket itself. So now we're just gonna drop it in place. No force needed. So we drop it in, give it a little wiggle, and if everything's good, you just put down the retention arm, and bam, your CPU is installed. And up next, our RAM. So our motherboard has 4 RAM slots. Today we're gonna be installing our RAM sticks on positions 2 and 4. There's a reason for that. They're designated to be running in dual channel mode. To be able to do that on our motherboard, if you refer to the manual, you're gonna need to install RAM sticks 1 slot apart. So that's why we're doing this. You'll notice that the bottom of the RAM sticks, there's like a little notch. It means it's keyed, meaning there's only one way you can insert this on the motherboard. So just match it on the slot itself. So you line it up, and then take both of your fingers and then apply even pressure on both sides until you hear a satisfying click. There, satisfying click. So that's one installed. Now let's get the second one installed. All right, so on slot number 2 this time, and then even pressure on both sides. There, and our RAM sticks are installed. For the storage, we're going to be installing the M.2 SSD on our motherboard itself. There's 2 slots here, this one and this one. I don't have the other screw for this, so we're not going to install it on the top slot for now. We're going to install it down here in the second slot. So you'll need like another screwdriver for that. So remove screw that's on the end, and how you'll install it is like this. So take your M.2 SSD. You'll notice that the bottom is also keyed. That's gonna go something like this. You want to insert it at an angle. Okay, so once it's at an angle, you'll push it down. The top of it will line up with the screw hole. With that, let me just get my screwdriver. We're gonna be screwing it down at the tip. And your M.2 SSD is installed. Last but not least, before we install the motherboard into the case, we'll want to install our Wraith Prism cooler. We'll need some thermal compound. So here I have just a random cryorig thermal compound tube. So we'll apply some in the middle of our CPU. So in terms of amount, it just needs to be a pea-sized amount. The mounting pressure from the cooler will flatten it out and make sure everything is spread evenly. So we want to put like an even dollop in the middle. There, and I think that's good enough. We'll grab our Wraith Prism cooler. And this is actually my first time working with a Prism cooler, so let's see how this goes. So we're gonna lay it on top of our CPU and make sure these tabs that are on the side will catch these like two pegs that are jutting out here on the side. So let me try to get it. Okay, we got one in. And then on the other side, you have to make sure it also reaches. There we go. And there's like this bracket here, so you want to bring it over to one side to make sure it's like locked into place. So there we go. Actually, this is a little embarrassing. The AMD logo is upside down, so we're gonna have to do it again, but the other way. So please bear with me. Take two, we'll try it again. We'll try to put a bit more on the side closer the VRM solution, so a little bit back here. I think that should be enough. Okay, and second time's the charm. We'll make sure everything is accessible. Okay, so we drop it into place. Put down the clamp on this end. Okay, it's into place, and then the other side as well. And then the switch on the back. So now it is in place, and I can actually pick it up with one hand. So CPU heatsink installed. This Wraith Prism cooler comes with 3 connectors. So the first one we're going to connect is the CPU fan. Our CPU fan header is here. It's also keyed, so it only goes in one way. So just plug it in, and CPU fan done. And then what I like to do is just kind of, jankily put this underneath. We can get zip ties for this later, but for now that's gonna do. For the other side, so we have 2 other cables. This one with the 4 female ends. This is the LED lighting. So on our motherboard, we have an LED header. So we're gonna go ahead and make sure that the arrow is aligned with the first pin. So we're gonna align it this way and plug it in. And fan cable for the LED installed. So we'll try to tuck that in as well. We're gonna get some zip ties later. Next, now would be a good time to get our case, because now we're gonna be installing the motherboard with all the stuff we've already assembled into the motherboard tray. For now, we're gonna be inspecting the motherboard standoffs. You'll notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then this one is knocked out because it's just like a peg. We're gonna have to check that the motherboard standoffs match the holes on our motherboard. Showing you real quickly, here's our motherboard. You'll notice there's a hole here and a hole here. Holes in the middle, there you can see it, here on the side and the bottom. So we have to make sure they're aligned with ours. I already did the checking, and the ones on the right side we're gonna have to remove because we don't really need them. So I'll remove them. You need a wrench for this step. So sometimes the manufacturers include them in the box of accessories. Other times they don't. So you'll need like a wrench. I have here a wrench attachment on my screwdriver, so that's helpful. All right, and just for the sake of demonstration, this is what the standoff looks like up close. Okay, so now that we've removed the extra standoffs that we don't need for our motherboard, it will really vary on your motherboard. We're going to be installing the motherboard into the case. So what you want to do, I usually hold it by the CPU heatsink. Just be very careful. Our IO shield is already installed here. So we're going to go at an angle and let it rest on the motherboard tray. So now putting it gently into the case, putting it at an angle, you see that I'm holding it up so that the IO shield fits in the IO shield compartment, and then letting it sit properly. We're gonna be screwing in the motherboard with these screws. They kind of look like little screws with a little hat on top. These should come with your case, so if you have a brand new case, these are gonna be like in a little box or baggie. So yeah, we're gonna be using 5 for this case. And there, the final screw. So we've successfully installed our motherboard, and I'm gonna stand the case up now. And there we have it. There's the motherboard installed in our case. I think it looks like it's coming together. All right, and now the next part I want to do for our build is install the power supply. So here it is. Again, it's a CX650. Our power supply is going to go down there in the basement. Just a quick note. So for our build, we're just going to need a few cables. First is our 24 pin. So this is going to go on the motherboard. Up next is the EPS power cable for the CPU. So we're going to be plugging this on the top right portion of our board. Finally, our graphics card is going to need some juice. So we have here a PCIe power cable. So this has a 6-pin plus 2-pin configuration. So we're just going to put them together later and plug it into our graphics card. So here we go. You want to make sure that the fan is facing down, because our case, we're lucky enough to have a case that has a filter in the bottom, so the dust doesn't come in. You should look for these screws. They usually come with the power supply. And finally, the last screw. There we go. Power supply installed. I'll quickly go over the cables that we need to cable manage. So you don't need to be scared, guys. There's only 2 sets of cables that we're dealing with. The power supply cables, so they're usually bigger and longer. And then our case cables. So these are the cables we need to connect to the motherboard so that our front panel I/O, the USB, the power button, the front panel USB, the front panel audio, and a reset switch will work. Okay, so now we're gonna route them in place. We'll start with the 24 pin. We'll do a quick reference of the back of the case. So we're gonna put it through this top rubber grommet and route it later. So that goes there. CPU power cable. It usually belongs up here on the upper left part, upper right from your point of view. So we're gonna route it through here. Okay. PCIe for the graphics card. There's gonna be a grommet that's on top of the power supply basement, so we're gonna slip it through there. You're gonna see what I mean in a little. All right. Up next, our USB 3 connector and the JFP1 cables for the front panel. Okay, so USB 3 looks like it's gonna go in the same hole as our GPU. So we'll sneak it up there. Followed by our front panel audio. So that's gonna go somewhere here. So I'm gonna try to find a way to sneak it back there. Okay, so good thing for us, there's a little cutout on the power supply basement, and we pull it through. And that's where that's supposed to be routed. And finally, our JFP1 cables. Okay, so our JFP1 cables also go through the same grommet as our GPU and USB 3. Okay, now that everything is routed, we can go ahead and turn the case around. All right, so first off, we'll tackle the 24 pin. So there's like this clip here. We have to make sure it aligns with like the notch over here. So what I like to do is kind of flip it over and then making sure that the pins are all together. You have to kind of put your fingers on the back so that, you know, we don't bend anything. Okay, that looks good to me. Next, our USB 3. So there's like a little notch. You make sure it lines up with the notch on the connector. Okay, installed. Okay, and on this side, we'll do the front panel audio. Okay, connected. CPU power cable. So it also has that latch on top. So you make sure it goes on the notch on the actual connector. So here we go. And it sounds like it's clipped in. We're gonna redo this front panel connectors because obviously it needs to be on the furthest side on the right. So not a problem. Kind of an annoying part of the build is making sure these connectors are in place. So you can refer to the motherboard manual if you want to do this properly the first time. I'll just show something on the screen showing you where to connect, because it does matter for some of these connections, which is positive, which is negative. Power switch, reset switch have been installed. And we're good. So the next thing I want to do before we kind of do more cable management is to install these sweet RGB fans. So these I'm planning to put in the front. And then these two, I'm gonna put one in the back and then another one up on top of the CPU. Okay, there we go. And front panel removed. There's a nice little dust filter there in the front, so it prevents dust from going in. And you can easily remove it like so. And now we can proceed to installing the fans. These are actually daisy chainable. So there's like a little connector that comes with the screws. So you'll see there's a little power in there. And then the other fan, it says connect. So this way, if they're beside each other, we only need one set of wires to power both fans. So that's pretty awesome. We'll start by screwing in one of the fans. So the good thing about this fan mounting system is that you'll notice there are rails. So if you need to move your fans up and down, you can do so very easily. The last screw. And then we have this tiny bridge between that first fan and the second fan. So this is going to allow them to daisy chain. So to connect them, we got to make sure that they line up. That's lined up pretty well. Now we screw it in place. And the last screw for the front mounted fans. Okay. Make sure to return the dust filter. Oh, and before we forget, we have to attach this power connector to the side of the fan so we can route it behind the case and onto our motherboard. You notice this has two sets of cables. One is the fan header that provides power to the fan, and then one more plug for the RGB header. So we have to find a 5-volt RGB motherboard header to control the RGB. Okay, so after a lot of finagling, we've installed the fans in the front and in the back. Should all be good now. I also took the liberty of just plugging in the different fans to the different fan headers. I don't have to waste your time with that because it's all just optional. But yeah, now we'll put the front panel and we'll tidy up the back. I'll show you a bit of cable management, and then we can finally install our GPU. This is pretty much what we're gonna rock with. We only need the graphics card next. Sorry about the chair moving. And this is what it looks like on the back. Not really a lot of cables to cable manage. If you're a little bit more thorough, you could use some zip ties like this. We're not gonna do that for now, but you know, there's like these anchor points that you can use to make sure everything's like neat and tidy. We're not gonna do that today, maybe some other time. We'll close up the back and we'll plug in the GPU. And now, the moment of truth, we're gonna plug in the graphics card. Finally, we're gonna plug in this PCIe connector to the 8-pin socket that's on the graphics card. All right, and that should do it. That is the build. Now let's see if it powers on. So we got the power cable from the power supply case, plugged it into the back of the power supply. I've plugged it into the wall already, onto the socket, so we're good to try. First, before you turn on your PC, you make sure the switch on the back of the power supply is flipped. So we flip it on. We see some RGB LEDs on at the moment, so that's typically a good sign. Now we press the power button on the case. All right, hey, we got colors. I consider that mission accomplished. Hey, look, the ring, even the ring is lit. I'm at a loss for words. I'm just so happy that it's over. Wow, will you look at that? This is our PC build complete. All the RGB fans are spinning. Even our RAM is lit. Our graphics card, even the front fans, wow. That looks really, really awesome. So yeah, mission accomplished. Alright guys, I hope you all enjoyed joining me on this how to build a PC guide. I know it's a little rough on the edges, but I was really stoked to have done this at all. It's been one of my low-key bucket list things to start a YouTube channel and start creating content like this. So if you enjoyed that, please do consider leaving a like, subscribing if you haven't already, and I want to know from you guys, is there anything that you want to ask? If you have any questions for me about building PCs, what do you want to see in the next video? Let me know in the comments down below. And I guess that wraps it up. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.